Okay, so I'll go ahead and pass it to our HUD TA team.
Good afternoon, everyone. Making sure I see my colleague, Joyce. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Kenesha Bryant. I use she, her pronouns. I am Black. I am with APT Global. I am one of your HUD TA providers for your unsheltered NOFO. And I'll pass it over to my colleague.
Good evening, afternoon. I'm Joyce Probst McAlpine, and I'm also with APT Global and one of the unsheltered technical assistance providers. And I'm going to pass it to Christy Greenwald, who is also providing technical assistance.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christy Greenwald. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also on the app team, not working directly on the unsheltered TA, but just here as a broader team member supporting the community on different projects.
Okay, and I do want to highlight Chloe Green. She is a subcontractor with APT Global. She's a TA provider as well. She's on the phone. I don't think she's able to get off of mute, but I just want to acknowledge that. And going to also share my screen to start our presentation. So if you can bear with me as well. And also to let me know, if someone can let me know if they can see my screen.
Yes.
Yes.
You can? Okay, perfect. Hold on one second. Now let me know if you still can see it, just so we don't run into technical difficulties.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So we can get started. Again, this presentation, I'm going to respect time, but this presentation is information only. It's just to let you know the requirements HUD have for coordinated entry. As someone mentioned that your community is in the process of doing the coordinated entry evaluation. These are some things that HUD requires all communities, not just yours, all communities to have at minimum. And there are resources and documents that you'll see in the presentation, and also will be able to send to Kim to send out to the committee or to the whole continuum so you can see more in depth, okay? So did introductions. I'm going to talk about the coordinated entry requirement. We're going to do a review of the core components of coordinated entry system, which is the access, assessment, prioritization, and referral. And we're going to discuss the coordinated entry planning, evaluation, and continuous improvement. If there are any questions throughout this whole presentation, we ask that you wait till the end so we might cover or answer those. And for the sake of time, just to respect the time. So coordinated entry requirements. So when we talk about coordinated entry requirements, both the COC, which is the Continuum of Care Program interim rule, and the Emergency Solution Grant Program interim rule require that projects operated by recipients and subrecipients of COC program and ESG program grants must participate in an established coordinated entry process. In 2017, HUD published the notice establishing additional requirements for a continuum of care, centralized or coordinated assessment system. The coordinated entry notice establishes new requirements for coordinated entry that COCs and recipients and subrecipients of COC programs or ESG, Emergency Grant Solution Programs, and those are usually your state funds, must meet at that time by January 23rd, 2018. So it is the expectation that all communities are now participating and have a functioning coordinated entry system. It also describes practices, approaches, and principles, or what we call elements, that HUD strongly encourages COCs to incorporate into their written coordinated entry policies and procedures. HUD's coordinated entry policy brief, which provides additional considerations for COCs as they develop the coordinated entry process. And again, you see the links, definitely will be able to send this to Kim. So I think definitely at the OAC meeting, you can look at even further, but these are the resources that HUD provides for all communities when looking at the coordinated entry requirements. So the core components of coordinated entry is access. And when we talk about access, we mean the engagement points for people who are experiencing a housing crisis. When we talk about assessments. That's upon initial assessment, beginning assessing the person housing needs, preference, and vulnerability. It is progressive, that is potentially multiple layers of sequential information gathering at different phases in the coordinated entry systems for different purposes. When we discuss prioritization, prioritization helps the COC manage the inventory of community housing resources and services, ensuring that people with the greatest needs and vulnerability receive the support they need to resolve their housing crisis. And when we talk about referral or / housing placement, we're talking about people who are referred to available COC housing resources and services in accordance with the COC's documented prioritization guidelines. So access. Joyce, I think I'm gonna hand this off to you.
Sure, thank you, Kanisha. So the coordinated entry notice requires the communities establish access point, which are places which can be either virtual, usually through a phone system, or physical, where an individual or family in need of assistance accesses the coordinated entry process. There's several different types of access points that communities can select, to meet what best meets the needs in their area. The first is a central location or locations within a geographic area where the individuals and families can present to receive homeless housing and services. The second is a virtual option, a 211 or homeless hotline. Can you go back, Kanisha? The slide went back. Oh, there, thank you. That a 211 or homeless hotline that screens and directly connects callers to appropriate homeless housing and service providers in the area. There could communities can also adopt a no wrong door approach where homeless individuals or families can present at any housing or service provider in the geographic area and be assessed using the same tools. So there has to be a common process and methodology, and that they can access services through any provider in the community. There could also be a specialized team of caseworkers that provide assessment services at locations within the COC, or a regional approach which has referral zones or regions that are created within smaller geographic areas. So coordinated entry is required, but what it looks like, it varies from COC to COC. Next slide, please. So there's a couple of important distinctions. We went over these different models for access, but it's also possible to have a variety of models dependent on the subpopulation being served. And there is 5 subpopulations that are identified in the notice that can have different coordinated entry access points. And so within each set of access points, whether it's for a youth system or everybody is served by the entire coordinated entry process, they all have to take the same approach, use the same assessment and policies and procedures, and then we'll get to prioritization and referral. And then the most important part of access is that it has to be widely advertised throughout the community so people are aware of whatever model of access is available in the COC. Next slide, please. So we have a few examples of access points. This is the example of a single access point. In this one, the COC has identified the organization that is most likely to engage the subpopulation, in this case, young adults, and made that organization the designated access point, in this case, the street outreach team. And subpopulation members that engage at other points in the system are directed to go to the street outreach team to access coordinated entry. So, and then the street outreach team is the place where people are assessed and go through prioritization and referral. Next slide, please. In this example, there's a multi-site centralized access point. So either drop-in centers or the street outreach team, either one can be an entry point for coordinated entry. And if the young adult presents somewhere else in the system, they would be directed to one of these two access points for assessment and engagement in coordinated entry. Next slide, please. And this last example is no wrong door. So here, all the providers are part of the coordinated entry assessment process and are using the same tool and the same procedures. So there's a lot of work to ensure consistency in these models. And in this model, there's no referral to another place. Any point of contact is the starting point for coordinated entry. So it reduces the burden on the person. They don't have to go someplace else to be able to access coordinated entry. And I think the next slide is yours.
Okay, thank you, Joyce. Talking a little bit more about access assessments, I'm sorry. So with this assessments, you just want to make sure that applies to one or more standardized assessment tools in your community, that there are written policy and procedures describe the whole entire process, including information collected and used in uniform decision-making. Your written policies and procedures prohibits that coordinated entry process from screening out for perceived barriers. It's important that there's participant autonomy, allowed to decide what information someone wants to share and can refuse to answer assessment questions and housing options without limiting access to other forms of assistance. Assessors training at least once annually, and person-centered, meaning participants must be informed of the ability to file a non-discriminatory complaint. Privacy protections, your policy and procedures must have explicit language concerning protection of all data collected in coordinated entry policy. So what you're seeing right here is just more of an illustration. It's using a phased approach, progressively collecting only enough data to prioritize and refer. Sometimes communities use collapsing or integrating stages in assessment can be appropriate, depending on the design of the COC's access points and roles defined for assessors. Staff administrating assessments must use culturally incompetent practices, adopt trauma-informed practices, and are trained on safety planning. Assessments are based on participant strengths, are easily understood and sensitive to people with lived experience. Street outreach activities most of the time are incorporated in these assessments. So of course we have examples when your community is going through the process of looking at your coordinated entry policies and procedures. This is a document that HUD provides that, again, I would send to Kim to send out to your OAC committee or any other committee that will take charge in this, but it's just more of a sample that HUD clearly can give you examples of what you can input. A sample policy and procedure can be so simple as the COC's coordinated entry process will provide a standardized assessment process to all coordinated entry participants, ensuring unified decision-making and coordination of care for persons experiencing housing crisis, minimum. Of course, you can do more. And also there needs to be written documentation of how that procedure will look like enforcing your policy. So a little bit about prioritization, and I think I'm kicking this back to you, Joyce.
Sure. So prioritization is really the heart of coordinated entry. But really coordinated entry exists because no community has enough resources to meet all the needs of people experiencing homelessness. And so prioritization creates a system-wide understanding of what resources are targeted to people with different characteristics. Some of the requirements in the HUD notice are listed here. The COC must use coordinated entry process to prioritize homeless systems within the COC's geographic area for access to housing and supportive services. Crisis response can be included in coordinated entry, but it's not required. Written policies and procedures must include the process by which the COC staff will make prioritization decisions for each project type. Prioritization must be based on specific and defined set of criteria. In 2016, HUD issued a prioritization notice specifically for permanent supportive housing, which needs to be incorporated into the community's overall prioritization processes. Prioritization has to distinguish between the interventions that will not be prioritized. As I mentioned, crisis response is not required to be included in coordinated entry because, as it says, based on the severity of service needs or vulnerability, such as emergency entry to emergency shelter, if you don't have it covered by coordinated entry, that may allow for a more immediate crisis response. And everything included in coordinated entry, all these components that we're talking about have to comply with various fair housing and access laws, so that it has to be non-discriminatory. Next slide, please. So prioritization is determining, as I said, the order in which people are referred to openings in housing or service projects. And again, this is required, but it is not dictated by HUD. So communities have to determine, on their own, based on the needs of people in their community, what factors they're going to use to prioritize. And some of them can be the level of vulnerability and service needs as documented by an assessment, significant health, behavioral health, or functional impairments or needs that require a significant level of support for the person to maintain permanent housing, a high level of crisis or emergency services usage to meet basic needs, including emergency room, jails, and psychiatric facilities, risk of continued homelessness, vulnerability to victimization, including physical assault, trafficking, or sex work while the person is homeless. Next slide, please. So this is an example of how a community could apply some of those factors in establishing their prioritization. And this is, as Kanisha said, an example, and it is fairly explicit in terms of really outlining how prioritization is done. So the policy is that the continuum of care will use data collected through the coordinated entry process to prioritize homeless persons within the COC's geography. And then the example for permanent supportive housing is that ensuring that it's consistent with the permanent supportive housing notice, and that persons eligible for permanent supportive housing will be prioritized for available units based on the following criteria. And I'm referring to the chronic homelessness definition because that is often a requirement for permanent supportive housing. So the first priority is chronically homeless individuals and families with both the longest history of homelessness and the most severe service needs as determined by assessment. So there's really two prioritization factors coming into play in this first priority, both the time homeless and the severity of their service needs. Then the second priority, if everybody who meets the criteria in the first priority, there's nobody left in the pool of people who've been screened for permanent supportive housing or prioritized for permanent supportive housing, then the next priority would be chronically homeless individuals and families with the longest history of homelessness, but who don't have that severe service need. And then the third priority would be those who have the most severe service needs. And it does not look at the history of homelessness, but still they would have to meet the chronic homeless definition. And then the fourth priority would be all other chronically homeless individuals and families who are not already included. And the fifth would be other homeless individuals and families who have a disability and severe service needs, but do not meet the chronic homeless time definition. And this is allowed under the permanent supportive housing notice. If you have ended chronic homelessness in your community for people who need permanent supportive housing, then you can move on to people who don't meet the chronically homeless definition. Next, I think the next slide is yours. Yes.
Thank you, Joyce. So I'm talking about referral in housing placement. So when we talk about this, it's just some of the requirements for referral and housing placements that all COC program and ESG program funded projects must accept referrals exclusively through the COC's defined coordinated entry process. All other COC projects and services voluntarily participating in coordinated entry will consider the coordinated entry process the sole source for referrals. It must be lower barrier housing first, uniform across all projects, so no additional screening, no screening out for perceived barriers, and close all side doors and account for participants' choice. So again, some of the key components is eligibility screening and determination, participating project lists, referral rejection protocols, and referral data management and efficiency tracking. And I think the next one is you, Joyce. You're on mute. Joyce, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So we've been describing the components of a coordinated entry system, but there's also requirements about how a community or a continuum of care manages coordinated entry. So evaluation is one of those areas where HUD has set some expectations about what communities must do. So they must evaluate their coordinated entry system annually, and not only for compliance with HUD's requirements, but also, and more importantly, to determine if their policies and procedures and the way that their coordinated entry system is implemented is achieving their goals for coordinated entry. And so, as you can see on the slide, there is an expectation that coordinated entry be flexible. And that might be because resources available in the community have changed. For example, when ESGCV became available, many communities changed their coordinated entry process or prioritization to reflect that new resource. And the needs of people experiencing homelessness may also change. And so then coordinated entry would be expected to respond to changing needs. So when communities are evaluating coordinated entry, it's important for them to look at whether it's meeting people's needs in the design that was originally implemented, and also to do that working alongside with the people who are most impacted by homelessness, so that people with lived experience and expertise are meaningfully involved in the evaluation process, and particularly those people from communities most impacted by homelessness, especially Black people with lived experience, elders or seniors with lived experience, youth, and other groups that are most impacted. Also, evaluation has to lead with racial equity. Using a racial equity impact analysis as part of the overall look at data for coordinated entry, looking at the processes, for example, how long it takes for somebody between being assessed and being referred to housing and being referred to housing and moving in. Looking at that by different race and ethnic groups to understand if the system has disparities in how people are served. And then as they're developing policies or developing or changing their policies and procedures, grounding those changes in racial equity and justice. So some of the things that might be found in an evaluation that you really want to address in thinking about improvements to coordinated entry would be something like there's a fixed sorting approach or fixed prioritization approach, which results in lower need households being served more quickly. Many people on waiting lists cannot be located. Stakeholders or partners in the process don't seem to understand how the process connects or don't understand the coordinated entry system. High priority people, who are prioritized are rejected by the programs they're referred to. The referral process is slow or cumbersome. There's a high rate of unsuccessful referrals where either the client refuses to enter the program or the program refuses the client, or there's a long assessment process. These are the kinds of things that an evaluation might uncover about a coordinated entry. And then as this slide shows, when you have this kind of issue uncovered during the evaluation process, the next step is to figure out what the improvement strategy would be. So if your list is static and it's not moving, do you need to update inactive policies to determine who's still experiencing homeless actively in your system, and focus on people who are still currently homeless? If many people are on waiting lists, cannot be located, consider assigning housing navigators to people in the priority pool. If there's a high rate of unsuccessful referrals, there's a couple of ideas of what to do. But really, the understanding the root causes of any issue that is uncovered by the evaluation process is the beginning of developing your improvement strategy. And before our presentation, Simone really went through the list of roles for your system, which was really complete. But I wanted to clarify one thing. What HUD expects is that annually communities assess their coordinated entry system and they identify improvement practices, and then they change their policies and procedures. So you're changing your policies and procedures in response to what you find out about how your system is serving people. And then there's a required annual training on the new policies and procedures that's held after evaluation, then changes, then training. And that is the sequence that is expected by HUD for communities to keep updating their coordinated entry process. I think the next slide is yours, Kenesha.
I'm sorry, I'm still here. Just had some technical difficulties. Sorry about that. Give me one moment. Okay. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yeah, you're back at the beginning though.
Okay. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry. I'm gonna turn my screen off, but I'm still here. Hopefully that helps. We was at the end anyway. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm gonna go that. Yeah, right
Yeah.
there.
We'll end it like that. I'm sorry. So these are resources that we can give to your community about coordinated entry. Throughout this whole presentation, there was resources with links that I would be more than happy to provide to Kim to disperse in any committees that is fit, that's deemed necessary to look through this and explore further. I am having technical difficulties, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I think we're up next again. So give me 1 second, please.